My name is Chris Seelbach, originally from Louisville, Kentucky. I moved to Cincinnati when I was 18 in the fall of 1998. My pronouns are he, him, and I am a gay man. So I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. I was raised in a middle-class family. I'm an only child. Grew up in Catholic grade school, high school, and moved to Cincinnati to go to a Catholic college, Xavier University, in August of 1998. So I've been here 25 years. So the day after I graduated high school, on May 25th, 1998, my parents, I came downstairs and my parents were crying in our living room, and they said, "Please tell us you're not gay." And I had not told a single person in my whole life. And from that moment on, I identified openly as a gay man. Unfortunately, my parents were not accepting, and we had a strained relationship for over a decade with my parents and my family. I was the victim of conversion therapy, and all of that has led me to who I am today, which is someone I'm very proud of. Fortunately, my parents also learned along the way, because parents are not static and they're always making mistakes as well. And they've acknowledged that, and they're part of my life and stood beside me when I married my husband. And that part of my life, what happened to me in that part of my life, is the defining part of my life, and also what has made me the strong, independent, assertive champion of LGBT rights that I am, that I strive to fight for. So Cincinnati in the late 90s was not a place where LGBT people felt welcomed or accepted or valued. It was quite the opposite. Voters had recently, in 1993, overturned Article 12, and Article 12 was a provision of the Cincinnati City Charter that protected people from discrimination in the workplace and housing and public accommodations. And a pretty forward-thinking city council, I think in 1992, had decided to add sexual orientation, and they attempted to add gender identity and expression. They didn't get the language right. We went on to clarify that. And this is Dottie the cat. I mean, I feel like it should be included.
She's a star.
Yeah, so the City Council in 92 had passed this inclusive, pretty amazing, groundbreaking non-discrimination policy. And it went to the ballot the next year. A group called Citizens for Community Values put it on the ballot and said, we not only want to repeal this law and say that sexual orientation and gender identity are not included, but we want to write discrimination into the city of Cincinnati's charter, to our Constitution, and say that LGBT people can no longer ever be considered for any type of protection. And it was successful. It was a fear-baiting election that rooted itself in special rights, not equal rights. It had wide support among the African American community, especially among the Baptist Ministers Conference. There are pastors today that some Democrats and the Democratic parties embrace, who have never apologized, who have never said that they were on the wrong side of the history, and continue to lead our city with their history of dividing us and demonizing LGBT people, and putting the lives of not only LGBT adults, but of kids at risk by telling them that there was something wrong with them. And so in 93, when Article 12 passed and it repealed our inclusive human rights ordinance and wrote discrimination in our city charter, a lot of gay people left. And when I use the word gay, in my generation, it's an umbrella term, but we're talking. I understand that sexual orientation and gender identity are very different. We can use the word queer, LGBTQ+, but when I say gay, I'm also including everyone. And a lot of people just left. There was no hope left in Cincinnati for LGBTQ+ people, and so they moved to a city that that wasn't so backward, that wasn't so conservative. And Cincinnati was known and is thought of as one of the most conservative cities in our country. Corporations pulled out of our city. There was documented over 50 million of convention business that had been scheduled, contract signed, that pulled out and specified Article 12 as the reason that they were no longer coming to Cincinnati. So we were losing millions of dollars, and it was a pretty hopeless place for LGBT people in Cincinnati in the late 90s. And so that's the city I came to. I also came to Xavier University, which was a Catholic university, and it was under the leadership of a priest named Father Hoff at the time. And in the first several months of me moving here, he scheduled a lecture called something like The Intersection of Homosexuality in the Catholic Church. And I went to it, and there was someone speaking and comparing homosexuality to necrophilia and pedophilia, which is having sex with dead people and having sex with children. And so my welcome mat to Cincinnati as an openly gay man who had lost his entire family, it was not welcome to the party. So that's what led me to Cincinnati in the late 90s, to a very, very unfriendly place. Yeah, I came out after my parents asked me if I was gay. Tell me you're not gay, and I told them the truth. Once I moved to college, I was out, and I've always been more out than most people. I mean, when I was out, I was gathering signatures to include sexual orientation and gender identity in Xavier's non-discrimination policy within a couple of years of going there. I started the first gay-straight alliance at a Catholic university. So I was always out, and I was always willing to make people be uncomfortable with my outness, because what was happening to me at the time and what has happened to me now became almost a life's mission to ensure that young people who were LGBTQ plus were just loved and could live as normal as possible lives. And then it led me to have more empathy than I could ever remember. As all of my privileges as this white man, Christian, not poor, physically abled, all of those things, my story was likely to be a not very empathetic person. And but because of my own experience, it led me to a path where I'm far more empathetic to those who are different and want to fight and fight is we're getting off on a tangent, but to me, fight is an important word because I'm not here to just advocate for or lobby for or send emails for. I come from a long line of physical fighters in my mom's side of the family, and I have it in me, and I feel it in me that I'm willing to go toe-to-toe to anyone who needs that physical, and I'm not going to hit anyone, but there's no amount of straight, white, Christian, privileged, wealthy man that can physically intimidate me, because sometimes being in someone's space and being able to say, I'm going to check you and what your beliefs and your actions do to put the safety of the people that I care about at risk. And I'm willing to fight for those kids' lives. There's a person that's elected in our county who just was term limited and who just decided not to run for re-election. And he consistently has made horrible anti-LGBTQ plus statements. And 99% of the time, I believe in education. And I believe that, wow, if we just were able to sit across from each other at the dining room table or through a cup of coffee, I can get someone to empathize enough that they're just not actively causing harm. there are several people and a percentage of people where that is not going to work either. And so not sitting across the table and giving them that space to feel like you care, or that you're going to give them the time of day to reject any sense of decency, I think almost is more effective in almost saying literally fuck you, instead of being the polite, I'm going to educate you on LGBT equality, because there are some people who aren't worth that conversation. Yeah, so me leading the effort, a group of people collected about a third of the student body's signature in the course of a month or two, asking the administration to either include sexual orientation, gender identity in the university's non-discrimination policy, or issue a statement of welcoming. It took months, but they responded, and for the first time in any Catholic university, they issued a statement of welcoming that is today still in the Xavier's handbook. And so would I like them to say that legally we are not going to fire or hire someone based on sexual orientation? They still, to my knowledge, haven't done that. But back in late 90s, they issued a statement of welcoming. And then I said, okay, this is great. It's not as good as I wanted, but I want to make the statement of welcoming mean something, which is why we then started the first Gay-Straight Alliance at a Catholic university, which the new president, Father Graham, who just retired, approved. And we had a fully funded, recognized Gay-Straight Alliance at a Catholic university. And, the Catholic Church, I'll make a story very quick. Okay. Because this is a story I just told on social media, maybe you saw it. One of the requirements of getting a Catholic education is that you have to take theology classes. And that first semester of my college experience, I was in the most duress of my life. My family, my parents had what I felt like abandoned me. That was what I felt. And I had no one. And I was living in a city where I knew no one. And the days were really tough. And I was in a theology class once with a sister, a nun. And she has told me since that she could just tell that I was going through a lot. And she called me after class and said, what's going on with you? And I told her, and I don't think she was ready or expected that, I'm gay and my parents have abandoned me and have rejected me and said there's something wrong with me. And I went to this medically licensed doctor who was performing tests on me to prove that there was something wrong with me. And she was amazing and incredibly caring and sensitive and wanting to help. And the next day, after I left class, she handed me a postcard. And on the postcard, it had a list of resources. One of them being PFLAG, which the Parents and Friends of Lesbian and Gays, now they don't use those acronyms because it's inclusive of the full LGBTQ plus community. But that was my introduction to PFLAG. And about a month ago, I was building a cat bed, which is over here, in the basement of our building and over the Rhine. And I was going through boxes that I'd stored down there when I first moved here almost 20 years ago. And there were just tons of photos, because 20 years ago you actually took photos with film and then went to Kmart and they printed them out, and then you had these just tons of photos. And in looking through these photos, out fell the index card that this Catholic nun had given me 25 years ago when I was at one of my lowest points, and she said, I want to help you, and pointed me in the direction that helped. And so my point in that is that the Catholic Church as an entity is very different than the people who make up the Catholic Church. And I've always been someone, I respect both, and I respect however you want to fight for change. And there's a lot that you choose to fight from the outside. I don't want to be a part of a church or a group or a system that I think is wrong or discriminatory or has beliefs that are not aligned with mine. For me, I've always found it, for me personally, more effective and true to myself to fight from within. And I know that the people who are in the Catholic Church and the people that are in politics and the people that are in these change organizations are different from any kind of institutions that some may disagree with their principles, but the people are caring individuals who are not rigid in their beliefs and are empathetic to someone having a bad day, regardless if they're gay or not. But the Catholic Church and politics is what I'm talking about. Like you can still be a part of the Democratic Party and disagree with the stance that the Democratic Party has, but fight from within. And the same with the Catholic Church. Graduated in 2002. So I met a guy in 2001 named David Crowley, who had spent his career as a social worker, some of his career in the Peace Corps, helping babies who had HIV/AIDS, and came back to Cincinnati to help take over the family business, a pub in Mount Adams. And he decided in his seeming retirement to run for city council. And in 2001, when I was actually getting an award from PFLAG for starting the first Gay Straight Alliance at Catholic University at the PFLAG banquet, I met a guy running for city council who was this older white guy and he told the story, he had 4 kids, 2 gay, 2 straight. His gay son was an asshole, and maybe he's changed, I'm sure he has. But he told the story for a joke, and I liked him, and at the time I didn't have as much relationship with my own family, and so he kind of felt, he and his wife Sherry, almost like parental or grandfather figures to me, and so he kind of changed the course of my life as well, professionally, and so I worked for him on his campaigns, and then I went to law school after college, thinking all of the way that I wanted to be an plaintiff side employment attorney. I wanted to help people who had faced discrimination in the workplace fight for justice. My undergraduate degree is in human resources. I worked in law school for the largest plaintiff side employment firm in Cincinnati. But then I also managed David's campaign while I was in law school. And I really, because of seeing him and his work and his ability to make real change with the goal of not becoming president or governor or senator, but because he wanted to give back to his community and not himself and not to serve himself, it really inspired me to want to be involved in politics. And that's what led me to, after law school, not practice law. And went to work for managing campaigns at first, and then I went to work for a marketing consulting firm, helping other people run for office and building messages and executing them through paid media before 2011, which in January 2011, David Crowley passed, and that year is when I ran for Cincinnati City Council. So I ran a campaign for a guy named Jim O'Reilly, who was running for the Ohio Court of Appeals. But then I went to work for a marketing consulting firm. And so anywhere from Roxanne Qualls to Cecil Thomas to David Pepper, to people out of Cincinnati, out of Ohio, Chicago. So we worked Pittsburgh. We worked on campaigns all over the country, helping like-minded Democrats run for office. And I love doing that. Love doing it, and that's what led me to want to run myself. Yeah, so in January 2011 is when David Crowley, my mentor, boss, friend, passed away. And it was that year that I made the decision to run for council and decided to put my name in the hat. And met with a lot of people before making that decision, and all of them said, "We like you, we think you'd be great, we'll support you, but Chris, you're not from here, you just turned 30, and you're openly gay, and while the city has come leaps and bounds on LGBT equality, the idea of electing an openly gay person, we're just not ready for that. And it's so funny now because this was just a decade ago. And I was endorsed and supported by a national organization called the Victory Fund, which helps to elect openly LGBT people. And today, the reality is they have worked on campaigns for President of the United States for an openly LGBT person. There are United States senators and governors. Just 12 years ago, electing a member of Cincinnati City Council as openly gay was a huge deal to them. I was the first openly gay man elected to any major city in Ohio. Only the second, there was a lesbian elected in Columbus, but I was the second openly gay person ever elected to any major city in Ohio. I mean, look, city council is important, but, things have changed very fast. And so back then, when I talked to people about running, people aren't going to vote for you just because you're gay. That was a real thing. So, and we don't realize how things have changed politically as well. On city council 12 years ago, it was a majority conservative. And everyone running was running for re-election. Unlike this past in 21, everyone except one person was, there was no open seat. Every seat was open except one. There was only one elected incumbent running. When I ran in 2011, every incumbent was running. So there were no open seats. It was a conservative, Cincinnati was still considered conservative. And I wasn't the shiny thing. My friend, P.G. Sittenfeld, was also very young. And he was also better educated. He went to Harvard, or he went to Yale or Princeton or somewhere. He went to something like that. Princeton, I think. And he had gotten a Marshall scholarship and studied in Europe. And he was from Cincinnati, very well connected, raised tons of money. And he was like, if anyone's going to win this year, it's going to be him as a Democrat. So it was a big, big deal that I ran and then we were successful. It was incredible. I still get backlash today, and I've been out of office for a year. Yeah, there was tons of backlash. I mean, social media, even if you've prepared yourself to run for office, I recommend most people do not read comments, do not get on Twitter. People are so different than who they really are behind a keyboard. And look, it's part of it. When you sign up to run for office, because there's some good to it. There are some really fun moments and the ability to change people's lives. But it comes with really, really horrible comments on social media from hateful people that seem to spend their life behind a keyboard trying to break people down. And there's nothing that I can do. It's not going to change. It's just part of it. And so, yeah, there was, before I was elected, while I was elected, since I've left office, I still get, a lot of hate. And I will say that the one example that I tell is on election day in 2011, the current mayor at the time, Mark Mallory, took candidate Yvette Simpson and I around to the polls, and we were going to the polls, and my parents, who had come around, amazing, were also working a poll as well, separately. And my dad called me when I was at a poll with Mark Mallory, a different poll, and said, Christopher, I can't promise you that I'm not going to knock this guy out when he comes out from voting. And it turns out that my dad had been holding a sign that says, please vote for my son, Chris Seelbach. That's all it said. And the guy came up to him and said something like, I will never vote for that faggot queer son of yours, all of the stuff. And, my dad was, first of all, shocked. And, it was also election day, and he didn't want to make the news. And so we wanted to make the news for winning, not for... But my dad called and said, I don't know what to do. He went in to vote, when he comes out, like now that I've had time to think of what just happened, I might punch this guy out. And the mayor, Mark Nye, was like, we're on our way there. We're on our way there. And we didn't get there on time, but my dad, he didn't punch the guy. He didn't physically have a physical altercation with them, but he let the guy know what he thought of him as well. But you know what? The best part of that was that night when I won, that guy lost, right? So much of me winning was not about me. It was about the people who didn't think that an openly gay person could ever win. They lost. And, so much of this being on the wrong side of history is knowing that those who felt they were comfortable spewing the anti-gay and anti-trans hate, even today, whether it's tomorrow or next year or 5 years or whatever, we're always gonna look back on them and say, you were wrong. You were the one filled with hate. You were the one who set us back, and you were the one who harmed people, regardless of if society made you feel comfortable enough to spew it at the time. And so I think we even did a toast to that guy at our election night party, like a big fuck you to that guy for thinking that a majority of our city, the city that he also lived in, held his belief, because they didn't. Yeah, I think everything changed for Cincinnati in 2004 and the 2 years leading up to it. So in the early 2000s, a group of people got together and said, how can we repeal Article 12? Not only is it hurting us financially and all of the business case for it, morally it's wrong. And we are the only city in the country who singles out a group of people in our charter and says, you're not worthy of even considering protection. We took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and they refused to hear the case. But there became an organized effort of the business community, Procter & Gamble. And again, this was a very courageous, this is before pride parades were filled with corporations. P&G took a very courageous stand and said, we're going to, not only are we going to say, yes, we need to repeal Article 12, we're going to give money to it. We're going to help lead the effort. And they sent Linwood Battle, one of their executives, was part of our board meetings. He was in there listening to us decide on fonts for T-shirts. And the Catholic Church in Cincinnati at the time, the Archbishop at the time, came out in support of repealing Article 12. It's funny because the Archbishop in 2004 was more progressive than our current Archbishop. The current Archbishop would have campaigned against us. But we had the Catholic Church on our side. We had many faith communities, many black leaders. We still lost in the black community in 2004, but we didn't lose as bad. And then we did much better other places. And so in 2004, the campaign took what I've always said is a pre-Barack Obama approach to winning, which is we have to raise a lot of money. And we have to have a message that resonates with voters. We have to spend that money wisely at the end of the campaign, not when you're raising it. But how we're going to win this election is talking to people one-on-one. And we're going to spend 2 years knocking on people's doorsteps, knocking at their doorsteps with their doorknob, and saying, hey, can we talk about gay rights? Can we talk about LGBT rights? And we had thousands of conversations across our city. And what the most interesting part of that has always been is our straight allies. Because for the first time for them ever, imagine if you're a straight ally. You're not gay, you're not trans, and you knock on someone's door and said, can I talk to you about gay rights? They automatically assume that you are gay or that you are LGBT. And you get a sense for the first time of what it feels like to feel different, of what it feels like when someone assumes you are different. And it was a real experience for our straight allies just to have that feeling of what, it feels like to be treated differently. And not always bad, but different because of who you're attracted to or because of who you are. And so for years we went door to door and we changed the hearts and minds. And for me, it's we went on to repeal Article 12, but those conversations over the course of years, thousands of conversations, hundreds of volunteers, is what changed Cincinnati. Because most people, when you say, do you think someone should be fired from their job just because of who they love, said, no, of course not. Do you think someone should be denied a burger at a restaurant just because they're trans? Of course not. Like, if they have the money, if they're following the rules and being polite, who cares? That is the opinion of most people. And so, but fear tactics, the special rights, not equal rights, was effective until you actually had that kind of conversation with them. And so after those conversations, we were just on a trajectory of inclusion in Cincinnati, which has been different from the country and the state. After we repealed Article 12, David Crowley led the efforts to add sexual orientation and gender identity back into our non-discrimination policies. Again, they didn't add gender identity. They tried to. They didn't understand the terminology. They used the word transgendered status. Their intent was right. They got the words wrong, so we fixed it. But they attempted to add sexual orientation, gender identity. And then when I was elected in 2011, the votes were always there to do everything that I ever introduced. But it shows you the importance of having representation in government. Yeah, so when I was elected, we decided that we were going to try to become the most LGBT-friendly city that we could possibly become in terms of our laws. So we passed a domestic partner registry. We were the third city in the country to include transgender inclusive healthcare. We created an LGBT police and fire and mayoral liaisons. We were the first city in the entire country to make it illegal for medically licensed doctors to perform conversion therapy on young people, which was the most personal piece of legislation I've ever passed because while I was in Louisville, Kentucky, if what happened to me when I was a teenager would have happened to a teenager today, that medically licensed doctor would be breaking the law. And so we added gender identity to clean up our non-discrimination and hate crimes laws. We did everything legally and legislatively that we could do. And we scored the highest score on the Human Rights Campaign's Municipal Equality Index. Cincinnati received the highest score in Ohio, the highest score in the entire Midwest, and one of the highest scores across the country. One of the only things that we didn't have when I left that didn't allow us to be the highest score in the entire country was housing for senior LGBT people, and now we have that. So while HRC is always making it harder to achieve 100 or 114 with bonus points, I believe with the LGBT senior housing, under the system when I left, we would be the most LGBTQ inclusive city in the country when it comes to our laws, which, as we all know, changing laws is one thing. The Civil Rights Act passed in the 1960s, but racism and sexism still exist. The Americans with Disabilities Act passed in the 90s, yet most of the restaurants in my own neighborhood, people in a wheelchair can't access. So laws pass much quicker than hearts and minds and everyday life. But laws are still important. Yeah, I mean, I've been involved in all of our LGBT groups, from PFLAG to GLSEN to HRC to Stonewall Cincinnati. I was on the board in the late 90s. Stonewall was Cincinnati's LGBTQ organization back when we originally passed an inclusive human rights law, and at one point had an annual dinner that 1,000 people came to, and supported a very thriving LGBTQ plus community in Cincinnati. It collapsed after the racial tension in 2001, but I have been affiliated with almost every LGBTQ plus group in Cincinnati in some way. I was fortunate enough to take a sabbatical after my time on council, where I kind of quit things, and so I'm a supporter and I'm a contributor, but I don't have an official role in any of them anymore. Yeah, I mean, the gay bar has always been and was much more of a community center 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and leading back further than that, than anyone understands today. And there were lots of gay bars, and there were lots of different types, and it was a community center where you could walk in and feel safe in a world that you did not feel safe in. And when I feel safe, it's not just physically safe. You felt safe that you could just be who you are, whether that was flamboyant or in leather or in tights or in a polo from your accounting job. Everyone felt like they could just take a sigh of relief and say, I can just walk in here and have fun. And whether you drank or not was not even about that. It was about a safe space to be yourself. And so the bar scene was incredibly important, as it is in almost every LGBT community across this country. And so that's, when I was becoming an adult and turning 21, whether it was the Dock or Hamburger Mary's, Shooters to Serpent to Spurs. I mean, the list, WG Magic. My husband who's older than me, can probably list 10 more of them. The lesbian bar, Northside. I mean, there was a much bigger scene, and every night of the week, people were congregating together. This is before any online. This is even before AOL chat rooms and gay.com, which the apps exist now, but before my time, there was a gay.com chat room, and before any of that, there was just gay bars, and that's where the social scene was. And people went out a lot more, and the people were more social in our own community than they are now, because they didn't have a cell phone to connect to people on. So we loved, and this is showing my age of being a little bit younger than some. Hamburger Mary's was our all-time favorite place. So on Vine Street, when they originally opened, it was smaller than when they expanded, and we were there every single Thursday night was karaoke, and everyone that you wanted to see was there every Thursday night. And then we were Carol's Corner Cafe, which then became a bigger space. Friday nights were at Carol's, and it was a restaurant in addition to a bar. And then the Dock was just always when you wanted to just party some night. And they also had a volleyball court at the Dock, so we played sand volleyball there in the summers. And it was just, it was also just a bigger crowd and, more late night. So those are kind of some of the ones that I remember the most of. But then Shooters. I mean, so after I was running and was elected, we became best friends with the owner of Shooters, Howard Sharon, who had originally opened it as WG Magic, which is something like where gay men in Cincinnati hang out. Somehow that acronym works out. WG, where gay men, WGM. And so anyway, WG Magic is an acronym for where gay men hang out in Cincinnati somehow. And it became Shooters, and we became very close to Howard, and it was, Shooters became almost like a dive gay bar, because it was a country western bar that wasn't really country western anymore, even though it had the motif. So there was even those dive gay bars that you could experience, and the drag wasn't polished, and there's an allure to non-polished drag, and so that was also a lot of fun. So yeah, that's where we hung out. And Pride was in North Side at that time. It was much more of a community, and this is no knock on current Pride. It was much more of a community Pride where all of the bars and the storefronts in North Side just became part of the celebration. It was much smaller. You felt like you could see everyone. Everyone was together and not drawn out. And so it felt, we went through our neighborhood, through Clifton, and we started at Burnett Woods. And so people would be on their front lawns and we'd be passing houses where people would be having parties. Just a very different experience than a downtown experience. There were no corporations, or very few corporations. So the Pride was always something that we looked forward to and that was a big part of the community. So Caldy's Coffee Shop on Main Street was a place, I don't even think it was LGBT specific. It was just more of a counterculture, maybe grunge back then kind of space that people felt comfortable with. I loved Caldy's. There was a gay and lesbian community center on North Side. It was a very tiny storefront. I don't know that I ever went there, but I was aware it existed. PFLAG held their meetings in the Mount Auburn Presbyterian Church. Some of that was socializing as well. Glisten. So other than bars, it was more of these organizations that had meetings and social events. But I don't remember specific non-bar public spaces that the whole like meeting for hookups and stuff in parks was a little bit ahead of me, and so that was not. So yeah, those are the ones that I can remember. Yeah. So Craig and I met at the very end of the Pride Parade in 2005. I was working for David Crowley. He was running for council re-election, and I was managing his campaign. And after the parade, he said, go have fun, meet up with your friends. And so I met up with some friends, and we were at the Serpent, which on any other day was a gay leather bar. And I was a twink. I was a 150-pound, blonde hair, skinny boy in this gay leather bar. But it was just regular bar that day, regular. People weren't wearing leather in masses. And Craig was there with his friends, and we were on the back patio, and we kind of both looked at each other, and as I was leaving, he was leaving, and we made contact, and we hung out with our groups of friends the rest of the day. We went on a date later that week, and we've been together ever since. Almost 18 years. But yeah, we met at Pride in 2005. 5. In terms of the bar scene, it still is segregated. I mean, there still is many more men than there are lesbians. Now, I will say that I'll stop back. So it's still in some ways, gays and lesbians are not congregating at the same bars. I mean, I will say that the gay bar scene is much more straight white women than it's probably equally straight white women to gay men. And then I think that there are lesbian spaces, but there are no lesbian specific bars that I know of. And so I don't know that the bar space has never really been completely together for lesbian and gay people. And that hasn't changed. But what has changed is that it used to be pretty exclusively gay men, and now it's half and half white straight women and gay men. Yes. We were just, everyone didn't go out for COVID. And so and it's almost like before COVID, we went out a lot. And since COVID, we're kind of like old now. But we went out Saturday night, and we ended up at the Birdcage, and I swear half the bar was a bachelorette party. But look, bachelorette parties sometimes deserve their wrath, but they also are spending money at giving drag and trans people and gay bartenders, they're supporting them as well. And so as long as they're not sloppy, and I get that sometimes you just want to be sloppy, but don't choose our bar and our night to be the sloppy. Like, come have fun and party, but don't just like throw up everywhere, and don't like look at us like we're the zoo, like and so, but most of them are awesome, and it's great to share space. The late 90s or the very early 2000s, I guess, were probably my first Cincinnati. I don't remember my first Cincinnati Pride, but it would have been probably you could probably tell me, because I know Pride it stopped and started back up. So did it start back in 2000?
Yeah.
Okay, so probably around 2000 or 2001 would have been, it definitely was 2001. So right when it started back up. When it restarted, I just was a college student who, went with friends to watch the parade and be a part of the celebration in Northside. It was always on a Sunday. And so, it was just to go and have fun with friends. That's it. I'm sure I've been to every Cincinnati Pride since it restarted in 2000. So for 23 years now. And I've had many different roles. I've never actually been a part of the Pride organization. I've never been a volunteer, but I've always participated either as an entry into the parade, or supporting other groups or people running for office, or working the festival with one of the organizations, or just as a spectator, or as a Grand Marshal one year. So I've had very different roles in the parade, and I've been at, it was in Northside, then it was at Fountain Square, and now it's at Smale Riverfront. So I've been in, I think, every Pride since 2000. I think it was 2013, but I don't know, something around there. So I was elected in 2011, but that was in November. So it could have been 2012, which would have been the first 12 or 13, one of the first couple years that I was elected. And I wasn't there was it was like three of us were Grand Marshals. I mean, Pride is very different. I mean, we used to beg corporations or companies or businesses to support us in any way. And now it's we got what we asked for. Pride is very well funded, very well sponsored. It is, it is less of this kind of queer, alternative, kind of fringe event, and it's very mainstream. It's one of the largest events in the city, and it takes a year to organize, and dozens of volunteers, and lots of money, and lots of opportunities for all different types of people. It has become a very well-oiled production, and it started in 2000 as a small group of people just sitting around a dinner table, I think, and hoping it all comes together. But also wanting, I think there are always the people who complain about it being too corporate now. Back when it wasn't corporate at all, there was a want for corporations and businesses to support us. So it wasn't like we got what we asked for. I mean, it was incredible. I mean, not only is Jim Obergefell, who took the case all the way to the Supreme Court successfully from Cincinnati, he's from over the Rhine, and the parade is in downtown Cincinnati. And the day, I think marriage equality was on a Thursday. That Saturday was our parade. He's in D.C. celebrating, talking to the president on the steps of the Supreme Court. Maybe the most talked about, well-known figure for that day in the world. And 2 days later, he's in the parade in Cincinnati, Ohio, celebrating Pride. That was a moment. And for me, it was either a Thursday or Friday. Maybe it was a Friday that marriage equality came, because that night there was a impromptu meeting at Jap's bar on Main Street to celebrate marriage equality. And I was elected then, and so I was the main speaker or one of the speakers. And my parents surprised me in Cincinnati to celebrate with us. And that was a moment for me too, because not only were they like, yeah, we're fine with you being gay, but they drove from Louisville to surprise me, to celebrate me being gay. And so when you ask the question about marriage equality, what comes to mind is that moment for me. But then for Pride, I mean, lots changed after marriage equality. Some people thought, oh, we got it. Some gay people, some LGBT people thought, we've won, now let's move on. And a lot of straight people thought, okay, they got what they wanted, now it's time to move on and they can stop complaining about things. But as we know, laws change, and then people then take 2 steps back, and we've maybe even take further steps back because we're a whole community, not just a community of 2 lesbians or 2 gay men. And so things changed in terms of we were in some ways no longer the David, and we became more of seen as that LGBT people were regular, were normal, were not fringe. But of course, with that comes the scary transgender people and the scary drag queens. And, what now can we find that we don't understand or that we don't see around us? And how can we demonize and be afraid of, and through that fear, weaponize through laws and policies, so that it makes me feel better of who I am as the ever shrinking majority. So with the success of marriage equality became a whole new chapter in the LGBT rights. And look, the first part of any kind of civil rights movement is talking about it mainstream, and for the transgender movement, which has long started before marriage equality, but since then people have really started talking about, okay, why do bathrooms matter? Why do pronouns matter? Gender is not male or female. I mean, at least you have more people talking about those things than ever before. And that is a good thing. I mean, now there's ignorance, but at least the conversation is starting. Whereas 20 years ago, when you said, what does a transgender person mean? I mean, maybe someone would say a drag queen, but that was the extent of gender identity among the mainstream person. And that's changed now, for sure. People at least acknowledge that there are transgender people out there. Most Americans know that, which I don't think that they did 20 years ago. I don't think that they, just like 40 years ago, and in some countries still today, I don't think people acknowledge that gay people existed. Yeah, I mean, Pride is much bigger. I mean after marriage equality. Oh, after marriage equality, Pride is, yeah, I think it's so much easier since marriage equality to be an ally, to be a corporation who supports Pride. I mean, and people are making money. I mean, during Pride Month, all of these corporations, you go to Target, everything is a rainbow. You can buy soap that's a rainbow. And so businesses have learned that it's good for their bottom line to be an ally, which is great. And look, I accept support regardless of intent, even though I would hope that the intent is because it's the right thing. But obviously it is also good for business. And so with it being easier to be an ally and to support the LGBT community, you see more and more involvement in the parade. And by the way, it is not as easy today to be an ally to the trans community or to the drag community. And so it's also, first of all, it's amazing to be alive and be part of the LGBT movement during the fight for LGBTQ plus rights. I mean, imagine as if you are a black person and being alive in the 60s. I mean, was it easy? No, but wouldn't it be awesome to be a part of, the protest and the March on Washington and the bus rides throughout the South? I mean, what an experience we have as LGBT people to be part of this fight. And so it's also interesting as we're still part of the fight for trans rights and LGBT rights, but trans rights and gender queer rights, it's interesting to see who has the courage to actually say that and who is just waiting for it to be safe. Because there's a lot of people who are waiting for it to be safe because it's not safe right now. Who inspires me are people who are willing to make things uncomfortable by having the courage to say, what you just said, even though we're at a card game or we're at lunch with work people and no one wants to make someone else feel uncomfortable. The heroes in my life are those who have the courage to make spaces uncomfortable, because I guarantee you if that person is an asshole to you because you made them uncomfortable, they're going to go home and start thinking. You've planted a seed that maybe their belief is antiquated. It isn't right. And it's those uncomfortable situations that lead to change. But it takes courage. It really takes courage to be willing to make someone uncomfortable. Like any event, organization, or thing that takes work, there's going to be lots of people who just complain. And those people, I'm not disregarding their complaints, but I respect much more people who put in the work. And if you don't like something or how it's done, then show up and try to change it. And I'm less sympathetic to excuses of why you can't. Pride has absolutely changed. I don't think it's fair to say for the better or worse. It's just different. And there were aspects of Pride 20 years ago that I liked more than today, and there are aspects that I like today more than 20 years ago. I mean, nothing is black and white, and anyone is, if you want to do something different, then you should do it, and I'll show up. But yes, Pride is very different than it was 20 years ago, and I don't think it's fair to say it was that good or bad. It's both. Do I want to say this? I liked Pride better in Northside. I liked Pride better when it felt like we were all together and not strung out on this very long riverfront. But I'm not willing to show up to a meeting every Sunday to try to get it in Washington Park or wherever I think it would be better. I'm willing to show up on a Saturday and have fun for 4 or 5 hours and be thankful the people who put in so much work to make that happen. But for me, I liked it better when it felt like we were all together in one space. And it doesn't feel like that to me. But I'm not complaining. I appreciate and accept the current form of Pride. It's so funny because I'm just thinking 20 years ago, 25 years ago, if we had a Pride parade, which was very alternative, very, people making signs in their backyard the night before, and the people watching the parade saw a group from Kroger walking in the parade, they might have gotten the biggest applause of anyone. Because it was like, what? Kroger had the courage to put people in the Pride parade and they're marching with us? And nowadays, those same type of people would be like, ugh, corporate taking over Pride. It's really an interesting, but for any young person watching, Procter & Gamble, more than any corporation in this city, was with us when it was not safe and took a risk. I mean, how big of a company is this? And their brand are brands that you buy every day. And they put money, $100,000 into the Repeal Article 12 effort. They stood with us when no one else would. So, look, P&G is a corporation and they do lots of things that I would change, like toilet paper and how much paper and all kinds of stuff. But on LGBT equality, they were there when no one else was. And when I see them marching in the parade, I know that they were marching 20 years ago. Well, and John Pepper, I mean, he would actually be an interesting person to talk to for this. Who was, I don't know, what is it, president and CEO of Procter & Gamble? I don't know what their top person is. But he oversaw it when, during a lot of these changes and was instrumental in being part of this. So in terms of city council and our government, I think while our laws are passed, Joe Biden has always been right of don't tell me what your priorities are, show me your budget, and I'll tell you what your priorities are. And so I'd like to see more money from our government, more spent on LGBT equality, on spaces and on resources that will help trans people, trans women of color, sex workers be more safe. In terms of non-legislative, yeah, I mean, there's a million things. First of all, it's still legal in the state of Ohio to be fired because you're gay or transgender. Trans kids are still worried if they can play volleyball or if they can use the restroom that aligns with their gender identity. I mean, there's a reason that the suicide rate for trans young people is 40% that attempt suicide in their lifetime. And they do not care about marriage equality. What they care about is just living and not being misgendered throughout their day. And so there's so much respect and acceptance and teaching that we have to do surrounding gender. Most people accept that sexuality can be a spectrum, that bisexuality exists, but most people still see gender as one or the other, and we don't realize that just like sexuality, gender can be something it can be an extreme. Probably most people it's not. It's somewhere in the middle. And then also things like nail polish or the type of clothes you wear, we as humans create that as what it means in terms of gender. And there's a difference between the gender you're assigned when you're born based on the genitalia that doctors perceive you have and your brain and who you are. And that just because humans have decided that we assign someone a gender based on what their body looks like when they're born, that's a human decision. And we need to, as everything in life comes down to, respect someone and who they are as a person. And it sounds so simple, but yet that's what all of it comes down to. If someone wants to use these pronouns, who are we to question what that means or why it means that? Or, so much of life just comes down to, well, I would love for you to understand. At the most simplest form, can't you just respect? And if the answer were to yes, our world would be a better place, and trans kids wouldn't be having to worry about not being able to live because their family, their church, their community would reject them just because of who they are or who they love. So we are back to square one in a lot of ways. And that's a good thing in some ways, because we are starting to talk about gender. People that would never have talked about gender are starting to at least explore that conversation. And in that exploration, there's a lot of uncomfortableness and a lot of things that are a lot of bad things that are happening in terms of laws and unacceptance and now drag queens. But we have to be committed to that long-term fight, just as we were to marriage equality. So The solution to every single extreme problem in our country is very simple. And it's something that seems academic or unattainable, but it's gerrymandering. Everything comes back to it. Because Republicans are losing, because Americans are becoming and are more fair and more progressive and more respectful, Republicans have figured out a system where they can gerrymander districts so that the election is not in November against a Democrat. They've drawn the district so that the elections are in May or whenever the primary is held. Because whoever wins the primary is just going to go on to win the general election. And so you have these primary elections that is just against two people of the same Republican Party. And the only voters are Republicans. And so the campaign becomes who is the craziest of these two Republicans. And whoever is wins and goes on to win the general election. And then you have a majority of people who used to be somewhere in the middle because we had fair elections. But now you have a majority of people who are the extreme part of the party. And they can, if they do anything that goes against that extreme part of the party, they know they'll be primaried the next election and lose. So, the solution is a constitutional amendment to prevent gerrymandering. That's probably very unrealistic. The other solution is that we have state amendments, which we thought we did in Ohio to create commissions that would draw fair districts, but the Republicans then targeted the Supreme Court of Ohio, who now is going to accept their gerrymandered districts. So the solution is to vote for Democrats and to push for fair districts. In the end, that is what will change everything. Until then, it's showing up in state legislators. It's coming out when it's safe. I don't encourage anyone to come out if it's not safe, but if you're able to come out, the reason that the LGBT community, the reason that fight for civil rights happened so fast, faster than race or gender or religion, is because all of a sudden, all kinds of LGBT people came out. And all of a sudden, it wasn't this activist. It was your neighbor or your niece or your coworker or your cousin. And hearts and minds changed like that when it was personal to you. So if you're a trans person and it's safe to come out, that's where the hearts and minds are going to be changed by someone saying, oh, I don't think my neighbor deserves to be treated any differently. Of course, my neighbor deserves to use the bathroom and the pronouns that fits who they are. But, and right now, and I've always said this, LGBT equality should not be a partisan issue. It should not be a democratic value. And then the Republicans should be the anti-LGBT party. And it will, at some point in our future, be seen as a nonpartisan issue. Excuse me. Today it is not. 99% of elected Republicans, not regular Republican voters, elected Republicans are anti-LGBT. 99% of elected Democrats are pro-LGBT. So right now, it's not voting for Republicans and voting for Democrats and then fighting for fair elections and coming out when it's safe. That's what's going to change things. Ohio is a purple state. It probably is a slightly more Republican than Democrat. Our state legislator, the governor, the state senate, the state house, it's all far right-wing Republicans.
Yeah.
And they're not moderate. All of them are both in the majority and crazy. And that's why people are like, why wouldn't you, after council, why don't you run for state rep, state senate? It would be a horrible job going to Columbus every day and just saying how bad the other side is doing. Because they don't even let you get a hearing on a bill, much less doing it. Yeah. One of the things that I found most interesting at the end of my time on council is that I wasn't being attacked. When I began on council, who would attack me the most were these right-wing, Republican, older white men. As I ended my 10 years on council, who I was attacked most were younger, white socialists who I was not liberal or progressive or socialist, and I'm not a socialist, enough. And because I was the gay person on council, I think there was extra pressure that maybe because I was gay that I was expected to also be a socialist. Or expected that I think we should truly defund the police, not move resources where it makes sense, but defund the police. And because that's not who I am, and that I'm not a socialist, and and I don't think a socialist could ever get elected in Cincinnati today. That's where I get the most hate. Yeah. So it was all surrounding the Black Lives Matter movement and what happened to George Floyd. What was most, and this was when we were on a fiscal calendar, so we had budget hearings throughout the whole city for the month of May or June, and that was when George Floyd was killed. And when there was we had hundreds of people coming to our budget hearings, but they wanted to talk about Black Lives Matter. It wasn't black people who were coming to talk about Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and calling for all of us to be unelected and kicked out. It was young white socialists who were upset. And look, it was my job, and I did listen and took into account, and we made changes. Breonna's law we passed to make it much harder, almost impossible to get a no-knock warrant. But it was very interesting and very different from 2001 when we had the racial unrest, when it was the black community who I saw and who came to our meetings. The hundreds of them were all young white kids. Just interesting, not bad, but different.